At this point, I am very happy to pass the baton to our wonderful guest moderator, Gabrielle Jackson, who will introduce herself and take the session from here. So off to you, Gabrielle.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you all so much. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Gabrielle Jackson. My pronouns are she, her. I am a dark-skinned Black woman with long curly hair in a Black sweater with a painting of Las Vegas in my background. I'm coming to you today from Las Vegas, Nevada, which is the home of the New peoples. And the New are the Western Shoshone peoples. And the Western Shoshone are grounded in the land, and their bands are named for the type of food that traditionally was their predominant source of sustenance. The Western Shoshone live in colonies and reservations throughout the state, including Battle Mountain, Elko, Wells, Fallon, and Duckwater Indian reservations. They are keenly aware of the importance of preserving the environment and all its fruits for future generations. Today, I want to take a moment to thank and honor the Western Shoshone people who are still here, the New people who still live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and are still protectors of the land and the water in the area. I also want to offer an acknowledgement of the ancestry in the room. I want to thank your ancestors and mine on both your mother and father's side for coming into this space with us and allowing us to have the gifts that we bring with us into this space. My ancestors specifically were brought over forcibly from Africa and enslaved by the US, by members of our country. And I just wanted to offer an acknowledgement of Juneteenth today, which is the celebration started in 1865 in Galveston, Texas, celebrating the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. It's important to note that there were some years between the two, between the Emancipation Proclamation news reaching the end of the line, which is Galveston, Texas, and those enslaved peoples finding out they were free. Just like that time was taken, there has been a long, long time taken between the Black American people calling for change in this country and that change being brought to fruition. And I just want to acknowledge that today on what is now a federal holiday for all of us. So thank you all for that. I'm so excited to be joined today by Camille Jenkins and Rosa Navarrete, two wonderful and incredible human beings who I'll let introduce themselves here in just a minute. Camille, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. Happy Juneteenth, and I hope you are having a fantastic, loving, blessed, wonderful Saturday early afternoon. My pronouns are she and her, and I just want to thank you all for being here today and for allowing me in this space. So thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Camille. And Rosa?
Hi, folks. I'm Rosa Navarrete, she, her, hers. I also want to say it's an honor to be here today on such an important day. And I don't take that lightly. And I'm on the journey of my indigenous roots. So I only know myself as a Peruana right now, a Peruvian South American. I'm a Latina with dark brown hair, and I'd be tanner if I were out, but pandemic has kept me in a hermit life. So I look like this. It's a mestiza. And I am a community engagement manager within Vertigo Dance Theater, a board member and teaching artist at Casa 0101 Theater. And I did support a little bit with community health work last December when we had a peak in the East LA and most of Los Angeles in our city, as y'all know. But I'm so honored to be here. Thank you, David, Camille, and Gabby, and Ashley. I'm ready to start this conversation. Thank you.
I'm ready to hop into Rosa. I'm so excited and I'm very much looking forward to chatting. But first I want to ask you both, how are you doing? We've been through a lot over this last year and a half almost now, right? So how are you feeling? How are you doing?
All the feelings. I I was really fortunate to have a dinner last night with a good friend who was the first time I had been out to dinner with her, and she's also a coworker of mine, and we hadn't been out together in a year and a half, and it was just, we were talking about this feeling of excitement and anxiety all bound up in one. And so that's how I feel. I'm super excited today for many reasons, but I'm also feeling this sense of like, wow, there's a lot to do, a lot to undertake, and how am I going to move forward? And I apologize, I forgot to mention what I also do, which is that I'm a director and producer, theater director and producer, and I'm the programming manager at the Wallace Annenberg Center for Performing Arts in Beverly Hills. So my bad about that. So all of those things plus personal, professional life, everything, it's like, okay, there's a lot going on.
Absolutely. Definitely a lot going on. Rosa, how about you? How are you feeling?
Also, lots of things. I think having accessibility to the computers has made me more like picking into pockets of like, I'm at Casa. This morning I was all at Casa with my students, and now I'm here and like I have to brain swap really quickly, but it's the same Zoom computer screen. So I'm sure everyone's a little fatigued on that. So I'm tired, although with that tiredness also comes gratitude because a lot of things have surfaced due to this past year, as hard as it was, and it was really hard. I did lose a parent in December, not to COVID, but COVID kept us from saying a goodbye to him. And I know in my communities here, like Eastern LA, East LA, and also in El Sereno where I'm at, where closer to Alhambra, there was a lot of loss. So in practice of as a teaching artist and as an artist in general, practicing like how do I enter space, but also having grace in knowing that everyone is going on a journey right now, and everything's okay. Like whatever happens, it's okay. Like it's just meant to be what it is. So I'm in constant practice now of holding that container of like, it's gonna be okay. It's okay. It's just one day at a time. Yeah.
I gotta say, you're very good at holding that container. And Rosa and I are also teaching artists as well. And we teach together sometimes, and it's just so wonderful to watch her occupy space. So thank you, Rosa, for that answer, and thanks for sharing that with us. I want to know, for the two of you, what does re-entry into the world look like right now? How does that look for you?
I think I feel as if it means sort of this feeling of jumping into the water, and you have to like jump into the water and find this raft and get on the raft and then make your journey forward. So there's this sense of for me in particular, finding out my comfort level around individuals and people, building up my social stamina. I'm saying that word correctly. and because it's exhausting, it's tiring. Like I don't know about you all, but like I feel, being social interactions are more tiring now because it's like a muscle that you have to really like create and act and work and stuff like that. And so learning how to have these conversations and being in these environments that I was so used to and I sort of took for granted before the pandemic, but now I'm like, okay, how do I interact with people again? How do I do that? And how do I do that in a way that feels true to myself and not pressured into
situations? It almost feels like there's this big rush, right? It almost feels like there's this huge push forward to go back to things as they were, as normal, right? But is there a return to normal? is there even an opportunity for that? And what was normal before this? Because in my experience, normal was, you know, normalizing microaggressions. Normal was, you know, normalizing unsafe workspaces. Do you all have similar experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I was blessed in that in the midst of the pandemic is when I started working for Vertigo, and David, as you all know, is the executive director of that organization, and they are just like in this flux of how are we inviting all staff to the table to talk about um, what does it mean to be remote, and then the conversations are now shifting to like, what does it mean to be together? Are you comfortable being together? When do you want to be together? Do you want to do a hybrid? And also now engaging again with our programming is starting to happen. So now we're also checking in with our collaborators and our artists and our partners and like, how are you feeling? But it feels very mindful right now, in at least in my space that I'm surrounding. And to answer your question, Gabby, I think before Vertigo, I was pretty freelance working in the arts. And it did feel very much so that I was in the practice of speaking up for moments of that I noticed those microaggressions. I think I was already in that practice of like, I'm gonna get fired, but I have to say this. And I was just in this precarious space of, I'm just gonna do it. And thankfully it, you know, as uncomfortable as it is, because when you talk about those microaggressions, people who are you know, intentionally or unintentionally doing that onto you, they're going to have a visceral experience, because immediately when you say the word race, for example, or racism, people start taking it super personal, which is, you know, it is definitely something to be accountable for, but also it's this huge monster that's been with us for centuries. So we're not going to unpack this in just a few weeks or months or even this past year. But what has definitely happened because of us being locked in, and I think it's been locked in our minds too. I think it's like I was saying earlier, surfacing some of that yucky stuff that we've been kind of like, it's going to be okay. I don't care. I'm going to move forward. And then you realize, you know, you get to my age in my 30s and all those things that you were dusting off or like floating back into your back, and then it just like resurfaced somehow. So I think it's an unavoidable conversations and unavoidable, I mean, for lack of a better word, confrontations that need to happen. And it doesn't mean, you know, that's the thing when you're having these uncomfortable moments, that's the best feeling actually. And just sinking into that and knowing that this really sucks, but I have to say this, and we're both shaking, and that means change is happening, even if it's a centimeter, and then we work forward. Yeah.
Wow. I think about, oh, Camille, were you going to say something?
Well, Rosa's testimony really is just like hit me there, because for me, before the pandemic, I didn't really see a place for myself at my day job anymore. I didn't see that for myself. It was very, for me, I was thinking like, well, this is probably going to be the last summer, you know, like this is probably it for me, because I'm not feeling like it's place for me anymore, for multiple reasons, for microaggressions, for lack of growth opportunities, for all of these things, for lack of wage opportunity, you know, all these things that, you know, we're all aware of in arts organizations and in theater institutions, but that sort of get sideswept into like, well, you're making a living at the arts, you should just be happy, you know, that type of stuff, right? So for me, and through this pandemic, being in a place where then I was really literally financially dependent upon the organization, the institution that I was working on, where I couldn't just say like peace and and figure it out, you know, where I knew that I had to be there because so many people didn't have that at that moment, that security. And even in the organization, the staff went from 50 something people to at one point 20. And for me to be one of those people still there was mind boggling and crazy and traumatizing in its own way. And so now I feel moving forward and looking back on the last year and a half and how my position has changed quite a bit and my perspective has changed quite a bit. I'm always still grappling with, okay, well, where is my place now? Where is this moment now? What is my purpose for being there now? Is it okay for it to be a little bit selfish and for me to be like, well, I am getting paid and I need the money and I need the health insurance, even if I am working at a PWI. All these things come up for me.
I would love to hear a little bit more. You said your perspectives have changed a little bit, Camille. I would love to hear a little more about how your perspective has shifted over the course of this last year and a half.
Yeah, I've understood I understand my value more now.
Mm-hmm.
As a human being on this earth, first and foremost, we saw a lot of death last year. And so everyone took stock and was like, okay, we're here a limited amount of time. What is my value, right? What am I here to do? And in addition, in the institution, I think in particular with the quote unquote racial awakening, which we'll see, you know, with everything with the greater awareness, I would say, or admittance of a problem in this country last year, understanding that I brought something very special to an organization that I didn't believe in before. I didn't think that I was as valued. And then I understood how much not only was I valued, I was needed. I need to be there to have a seat at this table. I need to be there and to be speaking up for these things. And I also need to figure out how to balance that and take care of my mental health too, while doing that. How to put myself first, but then also how to reach within myself and rise to a challenge of the opportunity that I have and to demand that opportunity that I have. So that's how my perspective has shifted.
When I'm listening to you say that, Camille, I'm hearing a lot of what Rosa was saying also, just in thinking about how she enters space. Rosa, how has the way that you enter space shifted over the last year and a half? How have you, how has that changed for you?
I push a Zoom link and then I enter. Just kidding. It's been interesting. So my schooling of entering community comes from schooling, because it's a practice and I still make mistakes. Comes from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond and Angela's Pulse, led by Paloma McGregor in the East Coast. And it's very much like, here's an example. Angela's Pulse, when there was no COVID, was partnering with Jacob's Pillow, and they called me up and they said, we need Latinx representation, come and join. Cool, I go over there and they said, all right, this is a 3-year program. We've already done about half of a year. We have a half of a year left. And so we're just hitting up all of these spaces that we were going to partner with and collaborate with. And I'm like, awesome, who are we talking to? And it was very much like, oh, we're not worried about that right now. We're going to listen. And so that was my practice. It was like knocking on the door. Hi, this is who we are. Are we allowed to come in? Yes, come in and sit down and listen. And it was very much like what is already happening in community, because community is brilliant and powerful. And we're not hovering over them with this like, we're the artist and we have, blah, 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 blah. No, it's a take and give. Like, if you don't know that by now, you should know. It's an arts organization. They are providing just as much for you than you are for them, right? I mean, if you want to think about it financially too, grants and all that, which is why they can community identifies really quickly and smells out Band-Aid organizations who come in and are just like, I want to throw this at you, but it's not an exchange. It's not like what actually is needed in the space. or listening and seeing what already exists. And do you need to be there? All of that has to be in question. So that was my practice. And although I already had relationships, let's say, with my students at Casa, it shifted because now doing it through Zoom, I'm over here like, I hope the kids come. Some of them have bad Wi-Fi. Some of them, are sharing Wi-Fi with like an entire home. Some of them have one bedroom to how many family members. So being mindful of how I speak, about the privileges I have. I have a home compared to my students who might not. How do I express myself? Using terminology, especially like, oh, that's so crazy. What you would say with your friends, now being like super aware because people are going through a lot of mental processes right now, right? And we're all, I think everyone is, and going through processes of engagement. And how are you, what is that word that we use, Gabby, in class? In exchanging intergener, I forgot the word, but how are you exchanging with another human being? And then through through the computer, I've had to get really animated. I even took a stand-up class because I'm like, I need to make sure people are listening. I need to make sure people are laughing and having a good time because this is a lot. And my kids, they react to movement. Thankfully I have filmmaking background, so we play with like scale, and it still requires a lot of listening. It still requires a lot of creativity, and it requires just like letting them know how amazing, I'm using them as an example right now, how amazing they are, and reinforcing that, and letting people take up space, even virtually, is so important. Highlighting them, spotlighting someone that you're engaging with, and listening is still part of the process.
Thank you so much for that, Rosa. I'm just so moved by the ways that your perspectives have shifted and the ways that you are choosing now to enter space, understanding the fullness of your value and the fullness of the value of those around you. And I think a lot of what I'm hearing that has happened, right, is recognizing the value of our lives and how, especially over this last year, how ephemeral and fleeting everything sort of is, right? And I think a lot of what has driven us towards that line of thinking has been this pandemic. So I want to shift gears now and talk a little bit about COVID-19. Don't worry, we're going to get back deeply into this conversation. We're going to revisit this because I really think it's important as we talk about reopening and safety measures to think about racial equity and justice for all as a part of those safety measures, right? Because making sure that people can enter space safely as themselves and the fullness of themselves, however they want to present or however they want to show up, is probably one of the most important safety precautions we can take as artists and practitioners, right? Asking people to work with their bodies, their hearts, their minds. So but before we get into that, I wanted to talk just a little bit about COVID-19 safety and what we're looking at as far as what that looks like. Rosa, I know you've trained as a COVID compliance officer. Could you first tell us what that means? And then let us know kind of what we can expect from theaters, what precautions we can expect as audiences and practitioners as we re-enter theater for the first time in over a year.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in COVID, but I've been attending a lot of informational conferences and just became that COVID officer title. And it just means making sure that people are safe and practicing safety when in community together with a project. And the certification specifically was for filmmaking. And I know that there's some adjustments for live performance that I'm not too familiar with, and maybe someone else might want to talk about, but it means checking people's temperature. It means going through an array of questions of symptoms before they enter the space, and also checking in with if they've been exposed to anyone who's had COVID, has COVID, if they have any high temperature, to have them sit, take a breather, come back, check again. And then if someone has been on set and gets COVID thereafter, and didn't show symptoms before, you have to like notify everyone and let them know that we're closing shop, and also that we have to check in with the city and notify them, because I think there's a web that happens, and they do phone calls too of who to reach out to if there is some type of an exposure of that capacity. They're mostly for bigger projects. I also know that a lot of my BIPOC friends are doing these positions, which is interesting. And it pays between $300 a day to $1,200 a day if you wanted to be an officer, depending on the size of the project and the budget. You can have your own kit. So if, as an organization, you can decide to provide a kit for that person or have them bring one. But there's a fee for a kit too, kind of like a makeup artist would charge. What else? There's a lot. But mostly I would say for sure when I want to stay on top of what is needed, especially here, is I go to the CDC website. And my other to-go place is the Wellness Center in Los Angeles. They're very, very good about informing people of what's happening, and they use bilingual language. So those are my resources.
Thank you so much for that, Rosa. And Camille, I'll pass this over to you too, because you've been, I'm assuming, a part of a lot of these behind the scenes reopening conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have kind of a two-part, thought about this. I obviously want to know what safety precautions we can expect as audiences and practitioners, but I also want to know, how will theaters be changing the way they do business because of COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really good questions. And, so to answer your latter question a bit first is some of the practical things are, getting rid of paper programs, doing digital programs, doing PDFs, things like that, getting rid of paper tickets, doing digital tickets, things like that. I think there's a greater sense of like, okay, where the spatial awareness, that we can't make as much money in the space, but we need to make sure that people are more safe in the space. So there's going to be more distance between seats and stuff like that. At the time where we're working, we open our outdoor theater space at the Wallace next week is our first live performances. And we aren't going to have bar service or anything like that. There's just going to be water at chairs. We're still asking people to be masked, even though, despite what the state says, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we are asking people to come with masks on, and it's an outdoor theater space that's temporarily there as well. So the priority is really making sure that people feel comfortable in the space as much as possible. I will note that, all of that is possible with a good amount of money, and that's the biggest thing that I really am interested in wanting to point out, that I'm, where I work is a place with a multi-million-dollar budget a year, so I do often wonder, okay, how do organizations that don't have that financial situation, how do they afford transitioning to digital tickets, to the training that ushers take, to all of these changes? How can they afford to be like, 100 seats versus 150, that's fine, and when we all know that every person that shows up in the theatrical space matters if there's money involved. So that's what's really interesting to me. And, I'm also an independent theater producer, and I have been working on I'm working on a workshop for later on this year, and me and the playwright, we're doing this independently. We're just deciding we want to work on this play and workshop it together. And we're like, okay, so how do we want to go about all this? This is like not connected to my job. Like, this is just us doing this. We got to, still pay people. Like, how are we going to, what's going to be and this is like, we're thinking about this in October. How do we, what's going to be, what are people going to want from us? in this, like, so, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of questions that I think that infrastructure really has a lot to do with how you are handling this transition. And I'm really curious about organizations, or someone that is also doing this independently, or smaller organizations, how they're handling the transition and how do they deal with that financially, because really that's a huge part of it, how you transition. And one other quick note is I would say that there's also a question or conversations always going on about, the speed of how we move, right? Versus what is being said in the news from the governor, from CDC. All of it's still very different information, because, and you can tell, like, some people are like going out without masks now, some people still have, so, and then how do we react? Because we know we're anticipating that there'll be some audience members who are going to show up and be like, I don't want to wear a mask, even though, we're outside, like, what y'all talking about, And I mean, let's be for real, like, we're going to have that coming, especially in Beverly Hills, wink, wink, so, like, I just, we just have to be honest about that it's going to be murky for a while. And I think it comes to have an organization having a strong point of view in really deciding what they want to put first. Do they want to put making money first, or do they want to put safety first? So that's how I sort of feel.
Absolutely. And I think too, and this is kind of a conversation that I want to hop into later, but I think that, especially now at a time when everybody wants to virtue signal and let people know that they've been listening over this last year, how are we treating BIPOC practitioners that we invite into our space who are also now testing out our COVID policies? You know what I mean? So that's definitely something. But you know what, Camille, what struck me about this conversation, this line of thinking too, was like, how are small theaters faring? And I know, Rosa, you've been also working, and David as well, have been working on the SB 805 legislation. Can you talk like a little bit about that and what that means and where that's at?
David, do you want to take you're so good at policy.
Yeah, Rosa.
I'll share the website.
Rosa, yeah, you do the website and share your role and the coalition, and then I'll do the politics part.
Well, I work with Casa 0101 Theater. Manuel Deleage, the executive director, started becoming involved with the Senate Bill 805 and helped launch it. Here's our website. Helped launch it out with the help of Senator Susan Rubio. And from there on, we've just had a lot of small theater organizations, small performing arts organizations come and join and be part of the movement. We are not advocating for AB 5 to vanish because we know that's important especially for labor, but we are trying with this bill, making a pocket and letting people know, small performing arts organizations cannot abide by the things that AB 5 is going to require. So how is it that we're getting funding, and also how are we being exempt of things, or who knows, right? So we're working on it. We're working on making sure the bill passes so that we can be protected as small performing arts organizations. I help with communications, so I help with managing the social media and with the emails that goes out to the coalition. And if you're interested in learning more or wanting to sign up to be part of the coalition as a small performing arts space or as an independent artist, I'll put my email on the chat and you can email me at the GASA email because that'll be easy for me to target. Pass the baton to David.
Thanks, Rosa. And I'll just share that. So this is for the state of California. So this is California small performing arts organizations. It doesn't just have to be theaters, as Rosa mentioned. It can be dance companies, music ensembles, anything performing arts. And if this passes, it hasn't passed yet, but if it passes, it could potentially be transformative for arts organizations, for nonprofits, could receive up to hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to pay artists as employees, and all the benefits that would be associated with being an employee, in addition, in lieu of artists working for free or of just being given a small stipend for their art. And so you can imagine how that transformative that could be. All of these, I think they're estimating there's over, Rosa, correct me if I'm wrong, 8,000 performing arts organizations that would qualify. Tens of thousands of artists would transform into employees and get all the benefits that are associated with that. So it could be really transformative. It passed through the state assembly in California, or I should say the state Senate, and it's now going through the machinations and the bureaucracy of the California State Assembly. So your voice really does make a difference. If you support this initiative and you contact your local assembly member and encourage them to support it, they are really listening to their constituents in assessing whether they want to support this bill. So yeah, so thanks, Rosa, for your advocacy and for sharing a little bit about it.
Thank you.
Thank you both for that. Thank you both. This is such an exciting thing to hear about, and such I think a groundbreaking piece of legislation. So you know, I've done some calling as directed. And I look forward to hearing more about where that leads. So thank you for sharing that. So we touched briefly on this too, but we talked a little bit about the COVID safety measures that are happening, and their efficacy will be tested in this, you know, kind of first trial run of theaters reopening, right? And also in a push to be able to really showcase that they've been listening over the course of the last year and a half. Organizations are slotting more and more BIPOC driven shows, or I should say people of color, shows about people of color, because when we use the term BIPOC, it means Black and Indigenous people of color. And often indigeneity is erased from our theatrical canon. And I just want to acknowledge that by saying shows about people of color. So lots of folks have slated those shows on their 2021 seasons. I know I'm seeing ones on this island a lot. I'm seeing productions of, you know, all sorts of shows. So I just wanted to tap in with you all and get your opinion or your thoughts about where this might lead and how we can co-mingle with like COVID safety precautions and equitable and safe practices for the artist. What can we do to move both of those things forward at the same time? Because a lot of what I'm hearing, we're talking about funds, right? And the allocation of funds. A lot of what I'm hearing is like, oh, we're building a new outdoor theater. Oh, we're building these 2 new stages. But I'm not really hearing a lot of, we're having a full organizational, like, you know, day of rest where we take a moment to take trainings and understand and process the last year and a half, both politically and emotionally, right? I'm not hearing a lot of like that sort of stuff being done with those funds. So what can we do to further those 2 things at the same time? COVID safety precautions and also the emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being of the BIPOC practitioners who are asked to collaborate in these spaces.
Really good question. Questions. You know, one thing I really think about is just because you can doesn't mean you should. So what I mean by that is that in particular, there's this sort of feeling in theater where let's do 12 hours of work because we can. Like that's what's expected. You know, we don't need to be on a stage for 12 hours to get what we need to get done. I'm sorry, you know, we just don't need that, you know? So I think really thinking about the hours we ask of people's time, you know, 12-hour day techs I think need to be gone. I just don't think it's necessary. And in addition, you know, it's all holistic. So this like this looking and listening is like a good theme of this conversation today. Listening is hearing people say, I don't have a car. How am I supposed to get to this from point A to point B in Los Angeles without a car and be here for 12 hours a day and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, you know, this flexibility that the pandemic has demanded of us, I hope will continue throughout the reopening, because that also gets into equity and accessibility, right? About transportation, about childcare, about all these things that really keep people from, you know, really committing to being in theater or being in an artistic production or going to rehearsal or any of that stuff. And it also ties in then also to safety, how much you want to put yourself out there amongst other people. So I really think that all of it's really combined. You know, COVID safety, accessibility, transportation, childcare, all of these things are combined and all should be thought about when we are building out these schedules, you know, because beforehand, it's just like, how much can we do? How much can we do? You know, and also I would say that you're going to have a show or more, you're going to program shows, you're going to program productions that are about people of color that, you know, have a, you know, Black director or a Latino choreographer or whatever show you're doing, and you're asking people to come into your space. You need to think about what about your space is not accessible to everyone. Where is it located? What is the neighborhood like? What is the food situation like? How can you really think about the artist that is coming into your space? You know, I think often about the fact that, and I'm getting all over the place, I'm trying to stay on point, but I think often about the fact of you know, being at the place that I work and being in Beverly Hills, and it's beautiful and it's great and it's gorgeous, and I'm grateful for it to be on such a gorgeous campus. But also, what do the Black people that we're inviting into that theater feel about going to have lunch in Beverly Hills? You know, what does that feel like? What does that feel really like? I know what it feels like. And I can tell you, you notice that you're Black in Beverly Hills. Mm-hmm. So I would just say that all these things are interconnected. And so if we're talking about COVID safety, we should also be talking about mental health safety, accessibility as well.
Exactly, yeah. And to your point as well about Beverly Hills and knowing that you're Black, I think the first time that I ever like had a real rough experience with the police, I'd never been pulled out of my car before, and nothing like that had ever happened to me before. But the first time that I had one of those experiences was with the Beverly Hills PD. And it was such an interesting experience to be in such an affluent neighborhood and to be one of maybe 2 Black people on the street at that time. It was me and another security guard who kept like coming over to like make sure I was okay, which also was like, oh wow, I'm in danger, you know, but also just like being there and being on the curb and being kind of criminalized in the eyes of the people around me because, you know, of whatever stereotypes they already had in their minds about what and who Black people are. And so to have that kind of really degrading and humiliating experience and have it centered, like literally, I think a block from your place of business was like, that was rough, it's wild, but those are the things that we as people of color are dealing with right now. We're dealing with an increase in police brutality. And we are kind of dealing also now with a rise in anti-Asian hate, and we're seeing people who need escorts from place to place, right? Because there's a lack of safety in our communities as far as like Asian people literally just being able to make it from point A to point B right now, and particularly Asian elders as well. So, you know, what kind of infrastructure can we put in place to ensure that that sort of stuff doesn't happen is kind of the question, I think, for me, as an artist, as a practitioner, as someone who is re-entering these spaces. And Camille and Rosa as well, I'll ask, like, have there been conversations behind the scenes about this kind of infrastructure being built within these organizations? Have you experienced that?
I've experienced conversation. Well, I'll say within Vertigo, we're very open. So there's this wonderful new project called Kitchen Table Project. And when we engage with Latinx communities, I'm present because I'm bilingual. And it makes a difference when someone sees themselves reflected back. So a thing that is easy, I think, that institutions can do, especially big institutions, is hire more people of color and put them not only in your lobbies, but put them in leadership positions where they're at the table making decisions, not asking for permission to make a decision. And that's gonna be a big shift, because I will never know the Black experience. I will never know the Asian experience fully. But what I do have in common is knowing the feeling of oppression. But you know, that varies based on, Latinos have been invited to whiteness randomly. This happened like a few years ago. I go to the doctors, come out with my paperwork, and at the top it said white Latina, and I was like, when did this happen? Like, when did I get invited to whiteness without my permission? Like, I don't feel that power, right? And also, at least I had some training. Had I not had some training in undoing racism in myself, and I'm still working on that, I had grabbed that paper and been like, finally, I've assimilated fully. And now I've made it. And that's all that matters. Because there is a community and there is a movement of people who do move like that in space. Let's not, you know, those immigrants at the border, they need to know their place. I came here the right way. I worked my way here. And it's like, where is your humanity? What happened? What in the process of assimilation has taken your humanity out of you, that you are not moved by the fact that there's an infant on cement floor wrapped in foil? When did that happen, right? And so I'm very much, when I'm with Casa also, knowing very much how white Latinos move in space is problematic. So I have to constantly also confront that, even in places that I love, because it happens everywhere. And we always want to, you know, what shade are you? You know, is always this conversation. Mejora la raza is a thing that comes up in communities, brown communities, like better the race, meaning for women like me being told to marry lighter skinned people so that our children could be lighter, so that they could navigate the world with ease. That's awful. Why is that a practice? Why do we keep repeating those things, right? And knowing that even with the experience that I have, and I, mind you, I've gone, you know, it's gonna sound like I'm bragging, but I'm not. I've gone to Berkeley. I've traveled all parts of the world.
That's okay. Brag a little bit, Rosa.
I went to Berkeley. I've traveled the world with my camera. You know, I've studied in Paris. I've studied in Ireland. I've done all the things. It doesn't matter. The moment I walk into Ross, I have someone on my back, because they don't see me as a person. They see me as that stereotype. I am dehumanized, right? And I'm not speaking that it's only me. A lot of us in this space are being dehumanized on a daily, and that affects us. So even with all the experience I have as an artist, sometimes I'm invited into galleries to perform, to do spoken word, to do art. And the minute I enter, it just feels like something's being collapsed onto my heart. And it's everything that you said, Camille, like, how are you welcoming people who are not usually in your space, And if you're making them, you know, presenters of some sort, how are you keeping them safe? And Camille, something you said earlier about in Beverly Hills, it's going to be an issue. People keeping their masks on. Who is hired to usher, right? And what do they look like? And are we protecting them when they are being confronted by ignorance? And when they are being spat on, or, you know, God forbid, knock on wood, when they are being attacked, what are the procedures of that? So being prepared for those things too. How do you keep your staff safe? How do you keep your people safe? And how do you, I'm just going to say it. If you are a white person in this space right now, you have a lot of power. Whether or not you want to acknowledge it, you just do. So how do you become a shield, an advocate, and a supporter where if you see an injustice, just step up and step in between and say, whoa, let's take a breather right now. What's going on, right? Or, hey, I'm witnessing something uncomfortable. Because sometimes to keep our jobs, as Camille also was saying earlier, to maintain the sustainability of like, oh God, finally I got something and I landed something. We keep our mouths shut, but you will see it in our bodies. We will shake, we will look away. Some of us will laugh. We'll be like, and inside it's just like, no, this is not good. And you can feel it. So yeah, I just feel like allyship needs to step up for sure. And I'm going to offer really quickly, there's a little COVID sheet that we did. I was part of a little film shoot. It's a short program, short that I did last year with some friends. I didn't go, I was working remotely, but something this easy, just create a little COVID sheet for your peoples so they know how to access the space. This could even have a little map on it. And you can have websites of like, know your rights, know that you can say no, know that you can walk away, anything that to help people stay safe. So there's pre-shoot practices, how to get tested, what kind of materials are going to be provided for you, what's the PPE, gloves, masks, all of that. And then the stations, right? Station A is for this, station B is for this, station C is for that. This is mostly for film, but it's something you can look up on CDC right now and create for your institution too. And I'm happy to send this to David for anyone.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for that offering. And I just want to like, Joanny, I believe is how I say your name. Is that correct? Okay. Joanny says, Latinos, especially in my experience as a Dominican man growing up in New York City, we tend to ignore, not accept, or fully embrace our Blackness. It's a constant battle with some of my homies. And we're even seeing that play out right now in real time, right? With the In the Heights movie release and the tone deaf, that's not an appropriate statement, pardon me. But the inconsiderate and pretty violent way that the director of In the Heights responded, and some of the cast members of In the Heights responded to, and Rita Moreno even, who is like my queen, also responded pretty violently to these statements saying, you know, people should wait their turn. And, you know, didn't you see the extras in the background? Like, didn't you see where we put? And I think we're thinking too, a lot now, not just about how many people there are, right? Because we could say, oh yes, I did see 10 dark-skinned Afro-Latino people in the chorus of those numbers, and that was enough for me. But I think more than anything now, what I'm noticing as we shift into this new world, hopefully, I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in the fact that, you know, something like this can be solved in a year, but as we move forward into a more equitable design of our world, right? We are not just thinking about how many people there are, but where these people are used as well, right? Like, what positions are these people playing? What roles are these people playing in the casts of these productions, right? Because I think 10 years ago, someone being like, yeah, didn't you see all the extras, would have been like, thank you very much. You know, I'm so glad that they were here. But now we are demanding different, right? And I wanted to speak to you, Camille, as a dark-skinned Black woman with natural hair who is in leadership inside of a predominantly white organization. How has that experience been for you? And what would you say to people who are kind of coming into that sort of power inside of this moment, as people are kind of like, we need someone of color right now?
I'm cracking up. Yeah. Okay, so the truth is that my title, programming manager, was created for me and began in January of this year. So that's the thing. Let's, everyone can take from that what they will. But in particular, what I take from it is I had to work for that. That was very much years of working for that. I've been working at the Wallace for 4.5 years now, and I started out as an assistant to the artistic director. And what it took was constant challenging the status quo, putting myself out there, inviting myself to meetings, inviting myself to events, mentioning, hey, I have this artist I know. Hey, I have this, can I program this? Can I show up for that? And then it's like, and then it sort of dawned on people like, oh, that's a good thing, to have me around. And but because, what I do know is that I provide a perspective that no one else there has in that platform. And it's crazy to me now that I think about it that I don't really know of many other Black women in this position in a LA major institution. There's the artistic staff of 3 people, me, the associate artistic director, and artistic director. So, I am now actually making decisions on programming and these things, and I think for me, it's what I will say to people who are moving into these newly created roles or being promoted at this time or joining, or so-and-so resigned and now that they want to diversify, quote unquote, their ranks, is that, for me, what it has meant, what I've always had to keep focus, and this may sound, it's going to sound whatever it sounds like, for real. So the point being is, I know that they need me more than I need them. That's what I'd say. Because no one can do what you do like you do it, right? So for me, when we want to do work about a Black perspective, when we want to hire a Black director, when we want to do unique casting, etc., whatever, when whatever situation it comes in, I provide a lens that is unique, and I own that and own it, and think to yourself that I'm here because no one else can do it like I do. And if they don't remember that, then peace. That's how I feel.
And
so I'm very grateful that people I'm around recognize what I do.
Yes. It's true, right? That we bring value, inherent value as people, no matter if we're people of color or not, but also people of color bring other life experiences as well into spaces with them. And I think often we're mined for, our skin tone, and particularly as a dark-skinned Black woman, I am like a really great way for people to virtue signal, because like you can clearly see me. If I'm standing in a line, it is clear that I am there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, but it is definitely a thought that crosses my mind. But if I didn't have this opportunity, who would? And then, I also want to say that it's okay also to acknowledge when you feel like you have an extra burden on your heart. Sometimes I say, this feels more intense for me. I need to take some space away from it. This for me is more personal. Like, can we go back to that? That felt a lot for me. Can I take a day to process that? That felt a lot to me. Mm-hmm. So also, that's what I'm saying. It's a balance. You can't, you're there and you're there for a reason, but you're there for your reasons, not theirs. So you need to, I think for real, just, it's always a work in progress for me to take that space for myself and to know when something's too much and I need to take some time.
And you bring up a really good point. There's a lot being asked of people of color right now. There's a lot being asked of people of color right now. As we reopen, we're kind of being asked to play midwife to these new ideas being born, these new ways of being born as well, right? And we're being asked to decolonize space, deeply colonized space as well. We're being asked to, come in on a moment's notice oftentimes to be put in place for people to, access our gifts and access our talents. Yep. So how do we navigate that? As two women of color, like, how do we navigate that? What we're being asked in these spaces?
Speak on it, Rosa, because Rosa was like preaching, y'all.
Rosa will give it to you, okay? Rosa will give it to you.
I love to hear her talk. Speak on it.
Me too.
Also, because like I don't have an answer yet.
Then I will do this for you, Camille. Okay. Oh man, that's a very loaded one. That's probably why I'm still processing it, Gabby. Pero I think this is hard for me, but setting up boundaries is super important. I'm loving these TikToks. Gen Z is amazing, by the way. I'm a millennial, and every time I go on TikTok, I'm like, thank you for that business advice, Gen Z. And they always talk about their beautiful videos about like, how do you say no, right? And you can say, wow, I really love that idea. I'm not at a place right now where I can take that forward. Do you need me to suggest anyone else? Or those beautiful words, I don't know, there's just nice ways of saying, no, I don't want to do that. Or I can't, or I'm at capacity. And it's hard for me to navigate that personally, because I love Gen Z. I think they're on a different level, wavelength in terms of being able to say that, hey, this isn't cool, let's talk about it. And I feel like my generation was very much like that gesture I did. I'm like, move forward, but you really don't. So what I struggle with is knowing I'm at that edge of my boundary, but feeling like I need to still prove something. And so I take on it because I'm like, I can do it, but even if I can do it, it's not going to be the best way because it's never 100%. It's one of those, like, I'm at the edge. And that's something that I'm still learning to this day for sure. And that I'm navigating, but that's my short answer.
Wow. Thank you. Yes, boundaries are so important, especially as we re-enter space with, each other, kind of readjusting to this life, right? The way that it works. Camille, do you have any thoughts on that?
I just really do agree with Rosa and what everyone is also saying in the chat as it pops up, that it is about balance. It's really interesting right now. We're going through this period of time where I will bring my husband into this. I feel for him because, so my job, they send out multiple surveys about like, what's your comfort level? And then now we're going to do this many days in the office. And then this month we're going to try this. And his job was like, show up on June 15th. And he has a different version of arts. He's in visual effects, which is a whole nother, you know, right? And so I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. Why weren't we asked these type of things before too? Why weren't surveys sent out before of like, how do you feel about your comfort level doing this? What is your work situation? What, you know, like, you know, all these things that I want to navigate the future by honoring the fact that like, sometimes I got to do what I got to do. I'm sorry, like, I just got to be honest. Even though sometimes it's really hard to be, I want to challenge myself to be honest, to say, you know, my life situation is where, you know, I don't have a dishwasher, so I have to do these dishes right now, and I'm sorry, I can't be in at, you know, like, or I have a dog that's old, and you know, and those are definitely more trivial things to everyone, to other people's situations, but whatever situation you have, you know, the fact that you can't afford to live right near your job because of the expensive housing near there, so you have to have a more of a commute, and I need to be able to come in 30 minutes later, you know, I have to, you know, all these things that just weren't given the time of day before. Because of what? Because of conformity, because of control. So I want to challenge myself to be honest. And that's how I want to navigate the future as we're going back to being in this workspace with other people more often.
Yes. Thank you both for those incredible answers. I want to look into the chat. Also, I want to open up space too. I know that Ashley also said this in the chat, but if you have any questions for our panelists, please, please, please type them into the chat. Use your raise hand function. There's about 15 minutes here, so I want to make sure that we get any of the questions that you have answered. I'm going to look into the chat and I'm going to read kind of what we've got going on. Joanny says, recognizing and embracing your power and sharing it is a Jesus move. We all need to do that. Beautiful. Recognizing and embracing your power and sharing it. Love that. And then I see balancing and knowing it's okay to say no. That's okay. We need our space as we keep on eradicating those mental suppressions and oppressions that were whipped into us and passed down to POC. It's true, there's a deep history and a deep cultural relevancy to, you know, saying no and what the cost of that is. And also, I think for, you know, female identifying folks as well, women identifying folks, it can be difficult because we're socialized not to say no. Or if we do say no very, very politely, because there's a danger in being assertive, right? Whether that be perception of us in public space, whether that be physical, you know, danger, physical safety. There's a danger in saying no. And so how can we, as Joanny says, recognize and embrace our power and exercise our right to refuse things, or exercise our right to, you know, create a space that is safe for us, and just worry about creating a safe space that is safe for us. Because I think also as someone who identifies as a woman and who was socialized as a girl, it's always been very much like, you know, oh, make sure you're looking out for everyone. And especially as, and I'll say this as like, there's a hierarchy of skin tones within the Black community. And I'm going to continuously reference like being a dark-skinned Black woman, because there's a difference in the way that I'm treated versus the way that my lighter skinned, yep, exactly. There's a difference in the way that I'm treated versus like my lighter skinned sister, or, you know, my cousins who are lighter skinned. And so as a dark-skinned Black woman who was socialized as a girl, a lot of what we're socialized to do is caretake. There's a stereotype within the like tropes of film and television and theater as well, called the mammy trope. And often these were larger, heavier set, dark-skinned Black women who were desexualized and kind of seen as the caretakers of society and of whiteness specifically, because these were maids, these were nannies, these were wet nurses as well. These were people who were made to care for everyone else. And so in my experience growing up, I was often kind of cast in that role because that was who I was anticipated to grow to be. And so often saying no feels like a betrayal of my home training, because I am supposed to care for everyone in the space. I am supposed to make room. I'm supposed to step off of the street if someone is coming my way. You know, I'm supposed to move around other people, and particularly move cautiously around whiteness. And so for me, as a woman, owning my power means standing in the middle of the street sometimes and letting people look real stupid when they come up close. But it also means creating space that is safe for me, and creating moments of safety in my day, in my life, that have nothing to do with anyone else. So, you know, as we navigate and as we continue, I think it's so important to remember that everyone is carrying with them a life story. Everyone is carrying in with them hierarchy of their body size, their body shape, what their skin tone looks like, how long or short their hair is. Everybody kind of carries in these, you know, places on the Eurocentric ladder that we've kind of developed in this country and in other countries as well that were colonized by white Europeans, and created in an image of, you know, a society that was not built for anyone else, right? And intentionally not built for anyone else. So I just think that that's an important thing to think about as we move forward into space. All right. Soy, I see some things in the chat. Let's look in there. We've got about 8 minutes left. Juan says, I remember getting emails and phone conversations after an office-wide Zoom meeting that covered anything race-related. The hesitancy to help or support BIPOC initiatives was the standstill that drowned out voices from being heard any further. Being told to leadership to make sure I give everyone a chance to speak instead of taking over the meeting with my responses was so difficult. And I think we've, you know, as people of color, we've been in those positions before, right? If you've been in that position before, go ahead and put your hand up. Yeah. So this is an overwhelming, you know, place of similarity where we all kind of intersect, right? There's different spaces of intersectionality within those, you know, those hierarchies, but this is a common theme. So white people in the room, with all love and due respect, I want you to know that this conversation here today is something that you can take with you into the spaces that you occupy, and really think forward as we're reopening, right? Because we're kind of talking about what comes after COVID-19, what comes after, you know, this time. And I think what comes after needs to involve allyship and accomplishment as well, because that's the step after allyship, right? So thank you for that. Thanks, everyone. All right, does anyone have any questions for our panelists? We're gonna close here very soon, and I wanna make sure that if anybody has any questions, they're answered.
And Gabrielle, I also wanted to give you a moment to share with everyone a little bit about your Joy Jackson initiative, if you're cool with that, because it's a wonderful initiative and would love to give people the opportunity to hear about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for offering me that space. I will take it. I am the founder and executive director of the Joy Jackson Initiative, which is a fresh approach to creating systemic equity in the theater space Right now, what we're focusing on the most is we have several learning tools, but our crown jewel, as I like to call her, is the assessment for systemic equity, the Joy Jackson Initiative Assessment for Systemic Equity. And essentially, it's a self-assessment tool that offers organizations and their leaders an opportunity to take a diagnostic and see how they're collaborating with the BIPOC practitioners that they invite into their spaces, and what their business model and the policies, practices, culture, and understanding and knowledge base looks like within their organization. So right now we're kind of taking those assessment cohorts and taking them through the assessment. We have cohorts from made up of people from all across the country. We've got some folks in LA who've taken the assessment. We've got New York, we've got, DC, a whole bunch of folks. So we're really looking forward to continuing also furthering the work in LA as well. Recently, we've developed a regional development arm of our organization, and we're currently working to create small community-based pockets within the different regions of the US, and hopefully soon beyond, to really build systemic equity into the communities that these theaters aim to interact with and serve. So that's our whole deal. That's what we're looking forward to. And as we move forward, we're going to develop a rating system for these organizations so that BIPOC folks can walk in armed with the knowledge that they are walking into the safest spaces possible to be a collaborator and a practitioner. So that's the Joy Jackson Initiative. You can find out a little bit more about us online at www.joyjackson.org, or you can check us out on all platforms at Joy Jackson Now. I'll put those in the chat too.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. For me, it's just a great example of like, we're the ones we've been waiting for. And, instead of waiting for someone else to be that change, you're being the change for us. So it's a great initiative, and kudos to you on it.